The glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor, its sound cutting through the soft music. Every eye in the grand hall turned toward the woman standing at the center, Emily Carter, fiancée of the Hale heir. And in that moment, surrounded by silk and crystal, her simple cream dress became the evening's cruelest joke. The engagement party was held at the Hale Mansion, a magnificent estate in Beverly Hills. Golden light from dozens of chandeliers spilled across the marble floor, each reflection shimmering like liquid gold. Here, every breath carried the scent of wealth and judgment. Emily stood among the powerful crowd, holding an untouched glass of champagne, her gaze calm, almost serene. But inside, she heard every whisper, every restrained laugh, slicing into her like a blade. "Look at that dress," a woman murmured, her tone laced with disdain. "The Hale family has never tolerated mediocrity." The man beside her smirked. She must have mistaken this engagement party for a job interview. Across the room, Ryan Hale, her fiancé, the only son of the family, stood among friends. His polite smile seemed rehearsed, and he didn't turn to look at her. In his eyes lingered embarrassment and unease. He knew his mother, Margaret Hale, would never approve of that woman. And tonight, she was going to make that clear. Margaret appeared as if the room itself had been built to honor her. The emerald gown shimmered under the light, her silver hair perfectly styled, every step radiating authority. She stopped in front of Emily, her half-smile frozen like a mask. "Dear," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear, "your dress looks rather modest. Did you borrow it from a thrift store?" Laughter rippled through the room, echoing against the marble walls. Emily tightened her grip on the glass, her knuckles turning white, but she said nothing. She simply met Margaret's gaze, neither bowing her head nor offering an excuse. Her silence strangely made Mrs. Hale more unsettled than any argument could. A middle-aged man, an old family friend, whispered to his wife, "She looks like someone who doesn't belong here." Another woman snickered, "She'll be discarded soon enough." The words hit Emily like shards of ice, yet within her, it wasn't cold that stirred, it was fire. She remembered her father's voice, the man who had left this world when she was 18. "You don't need to shout to prove your strength. Let your actions speak." Across the room, Ryan noticed her shoulders tremble, but he didn't move. His eyes flickered toward her, then quickly away, afraid someone might notice his connection to her. That single glance said everything he had chosen the crowd over her. The music stopped. The air grew so tense that even the faint clink of silverware on porcelain could be heard. Emily set her glass down on the table, her movements calm and deliberate, as if she were bracing for a storm. The chandelier light caught her face, illuminating the softness and resolve in her brown eyes. A young woman, a distant relative of Ryan's, stepped forward with a voice sweet but dripping in mockery. "Oh, dear Emily, you must tell me where you bought that dress. I need a place to unwind my spirit." Laughter broke out once again. Emily lifted her chin, her voice soft as a breeze, yet sharp as a blade. "I bought it from a place where people don't have to pay for confidence." The room fell silent for several seconds. Some exchanged awkward glances, others forced a laugh to ease the tension. Margaret's face stiffened, her eyes flashing with hostility. Emily knew in that instant the real battle had begun. Not between her and them, but between the arrogance of status and the dignity of a soul. She had nothing to prove. She only needed to wait for the right moment, and when the storm came, no one would be left standing. The music began again, but no one truly listened. The air inside the lavish ballroom had changed. A heavy stillness lingered like a storm, holding its breath before breaking loose. Emily Carter stood motionless at the center, a pale streak of light against a painting of gold and silver. Quiet laughter and whispered words slithered through the bubbles of champagne. Everyone wanted a chance to rub salt into a fresh wound. From the bar, Thomas Reed, the Hale family's private attorney, began walking toward her. A man in his 40s with sharp features and eyes that gleamed like freshly polished blades, he had always loved to assert himself, and in front of his future employers, there was no better stage than humiliating the poor bride. "Emily, isn't it?" He said, his voice smooth and gravelly. "If you truly love Ryan, perhaps you should wear something more fitting for a table like this. Maybe a Carter ring. Oh, forgive me, I forgot that name doesn't carry much value in the market, does it?" Laughter burst forth loud, sharp, and venomous. Emily turned toward him, her gaze steady. There was no anger, no fear, only a calm that felt unsettling. "You seem quite certain about that," she said softly, her tone gentle as silk, but every word cut like a blade. Thomas froze for a second, surprised that she dared to respond, even more surprised by the weight of her voice. Some guests shifted awkwardly, then laughed louder to drown out their own discomfort. Ryan still stood among his friends. They laughed heartily, nudging one another, as if this were part of the night's entertainment. One of them, a young man with slicked-back hair and a shining Rolex, shouted, "Hey, Emily, do you even know how to use a salad fork? Or should I give you a quick lesson?" The room erupted once again. Emily's expression didn't change. She stepped toward the nearest table, lifted a silver fork, and twirled it lightly between her fingers before setting it down with a crisp, deliberate clink. "I know enough to eat without drawing attention," she said evenly, her voice neither loud nor low, but enough to still the room for a moment. The laughter that followed was fractured, a few stray chuckles echoing awkwardly. The young man lowered his head, his face flushed red. Thomas forced a grin, pretending not to care, but Margaret Hale's eyes from across the room had shifted colder, deeper, and suddenly cautious. Margaret did not like being challenged. She had built her life by making others feel small before her, and yet here stood a woman in an unbranded dress without diamonds who had just silenced the entire hall. She strode forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Darling," she said, drawing out the word, her tone sweet but dripping with poison. "You must be feeling a little out of place. Why don't you sit down, save us the eyesore?" Emily met her gaze, her eyes calm, unwavering. "Thank you," she said slowly, "but I can stand just fine." Once again, silence fell over the room. An older man, a retired banker, drained his glass and let out a small laugh. "You're brave, young lady, but courage won't buy you a seat at this table. Here only class matters." Emily stepped closer until only half a meter separated them. "Really," she tilted her head slightly, her voice a soft whisper. "I've always thought people who boast too much about their class are simply afraid of being forgotten." The laughter stopped. The man looked down, avoiding her eyes. Margaret narrowed hers, feeling a faint tremor beneath her aura of control, as if a crack had appeared in her marble fortress. Across the room, Ryan watched, his lips pressed tight. Part of him admired her, but another part was afraid that the gentle, quiet woman he once knew was changing, slipping beyond his control. The chandelier light framed Emily's face in a soft halo. She took a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing. Inside her small clutch, her fingertips brushed against something familiar, a slender silver pen cold to the touch, engraved with the words, "Be still. Be strong." It was her father's. The man who once told her, "When you are silent, the whole world will listen." Emily didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. Everything was simply a matter of timing. Just one moment and the storm would turn in her favor. The jazz music played again, but this time it sounded like metal scraping against glass. The air inside the Hale mansion, once glittering with gold and elegance, had turned dense with contempt and tension. Everyone could feel the shift in tone, yet no one stopped, because in this circle of privilege, humiliating someone deemed beneath them was never considered wrong. Emily Carter still stood tall at the center, her posture straight, her eyes bright, though her hand trembled slightly. She wasn't afraid. She was merely holding on to her composure, determined to respond not with anger, but with truth. At the far end of the room, Margaret Hale leaned toward Thomas Reed and whispered something. Moments later, the attorney turned around, lifted his glass, and smiled with a smug curve of his lips. "What a wonderful evening," he began, his voice smooth. "And it would be even better if the future Mrs. Hale could share a little about her value." Laughter erupted again. "Yes, Miss Emily," a woman in a red gown chimed in. "What do you do for a living, or are you just enjoying life?" Courtesy of Ryan, Emily set her glass down. The delicate clink rang out like a small strike against the nerves of the crowd. She looked around, her voice calm but cuttingly clear. "I work. And everything I have, I built myself." Several glances were exchanged, a few smug chuckles followed. Margaret tilted her head, her tone stretched, dripping with mockery. "Oh, you work how adorable. Perhaps you help design phone apps or pack boxes at some Amazon warehouse?" The room burst into laughter. Ryan stood by, caught between embarrassment and fear. He didn't dare meet her eyes, only emptied his glass as if the burn of alcohol could erase the moment. But Emily didn't respond to the insult. Instead, she smiled faintly, a smile so subtle it made those who noticed it uneasy. Then suddenly, Margaret clapped her hands. The sharp sound drew the attention of everyone in the hall. Before we continue, she announced, "I have a special announcement. The Hale family has just officially signed a $950 million contract with Carter Innovations, one of America's leading tech corporations. They're calling it the deal of the decade." Applause filled the room. The chandelier lights cascaded down, illuminating Margaret Hale's triumphant face. She lifted her chin, basking in her own grandeur. That, she declared, is what true class brings: power, influence, and wealth, not cheap fantasies. A young investor at the front laughed. "Carter Innovations. I heard their CEO is some anonymous figure, probably just a marketing trick." Margaret laughed loudly, raising her glass. "Whoever they are, they were smart enough to partner with Hale Group. Not everyone gets to sit at that table." Emily tilted her head slightly, that faint, razor-sharp smile returning. "Carter Innovations, you say?" She murmured each word slow, deliberate. "Sounds familiar." A few nearby guests chuckled, assuming she was joking. None of them knew that with a single tap on her phone, that entire deal could vanish in an instant. Margaret continued her speech, glowing in her imagined victory. Ryan stood beside her, trying to appear composed, though his uneasy eyes kept flickering toward Emily. Thomas Reed squinted, sensing that something was off. A flicker of cold steel in Emily's expression sent a chill down his spine. Then a woman, a model and friend of Margaret's, leaned in, her shrill voice slicing the air. "Oh, Emily, I'm sure you've never even heard of Carter Innovations. It's a place for people who are truly successful." Emily turned toward her, her smile soft as air, but her gaze suffocating. "Oh, I know it better than you think." She lifted her champagne glass, gently swirling it, the golden liquid catching the light. A strange stillness swept through the table, as if someone had touched a live wire. In that moment, Emily realized she no longer needed to defend herself. The truth was already on her side. Everything they were mocking her for was nothing more than a fragile performance, and when the curtain fell, the ones exposed wouldn't be her. From afar, the old grandfather clock struck 10. The sound echoed like a countdown. She looked around at the laughing faces, the proud stares, the diamond rings glittering on every raised glass. None of them knew they were standing on the edge of their own downfall. Emily's fingers brushed against her clutch. Inside her phone buzzed softly a message from her assistant: "Everything's ready. Just waiting for your signal." She pressed her lips together, taking a slow, steady breath. No one could hear her heartbeat. No one knew the mysterious CEO they were praising stood right before them in the very dress they had mocked. The chandelier light flashed, and within that glow, Emily Carter's eyes turned cold as steel. The storm was near. The morning sun blazed over Malibu. The sky was so blue it looked polished, and the ocean breeze drifted softly through rows of palm trees, making the white ribbons draped around the wedding garden sway gently. Everything was perfect, at least for those who believed in the illusion of luxury. The wedding of Ryan Hale and Emily Carter had been hailed by the press as the event of the year. The guest list was filled with Los Angeles elites, politicians, investors, models, and people who thrived on proving their own importance. In the middle of it all stood Emily the bride, dressed in an elegant ivory gown without diamonds, without lace, only a thin silk fabric so pure that it made the surrounding crystals seem unnecessary. But her silence unsettled everyone. She wasn't glowing nor trembling, just calm, and that calmness to the Hale family was an insult. Margaret Hale, radiant in her deep violet gown, stepped toward the front row. Her face was taut beneath flawless makeup, her smile painted on like porcelain. As the priest prepared to read the vows, she rose to her feet. Her voice rang out like a bronze bell. "Before my son says his vows, I have one question for the bride." The entire room fell silent. Even the sea breeze seemed to pause. Margaret lifted her chin, her tone commanding. "Tell us, Emily Carter, how much wealth does your family possess?" Laughter scattered across the guests. A woman wearing a feathered hat whispered she could probably count it on one hand. Another guest, a popular influencer, raised her phone, starting a live stream. "This scene is going to go viral," she said softly, loud enough for others to hear. Emily stood still, her gaze fixed on Margaret. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. Margaret took another step forward, her voice dripping with disdain. "What exactly are you bringing into this family aside from that meaningless name?" Carter Ryan frowned, slightly hesitating. He glanced at his mother, then at Emily, the woman he had promised just months ago to protect for life. "Maybe my mother's right." He muttered, his voice low, but carried through the microphone. Murmurs rose among the guests. One man whispered, "He's having second thoughts." Another chuckled. She really thought she could climb to the top. The ocean breeze turned cold. But inside Emily, something burned, not pain, but clarity. She looked around the smirking faces, the phones recording the eager eyes, waiting for her to break. A man near the front, a tech entrepreneur, called out, "She looks like she's never stepped into a boardroom, probably doesn't even know what a merger is." The crowd burst into laughter. Emily pressed her lips together, then spoke soft, steady, and cold. "I know enough to recognize a bad deal." The laughter died instantly. The man lowered his head, pretending to check his phone. No one knew why her words made the entire tent suddenly feel colder. Margaret scoffed, her eyes sharp as blades. "Do you really think you're that clever?" Emily slowly turned to the priest and took the microphone. Her voice rose, not loud, but firm, every syllable crisp and unwavering. "Thank you for showing me the true faces of everyone here. This wedding ends now." A wave of gasps swept through the crowd. Glasses shattered. Someone laughed nervously. Ryan froze, his face flushing red with humiliation. He stepped forward, yanking the microphone from her hand. "You dare humiliate me in front of everyone?" Emily didn't flinch. "I'm not running," she said, her eyes icy. "I'm canceling." Laughter erupted from the guests. "She's lost her mind. Can't handle the pressure. Poor girl's got attitude." Margaret lifted her chin, her tone frosty. "No home, no power, no money." "You think walking away is a victory?" Thomas Reed stepped forward, smirking. "Don't forget the Hale family just signed a deal with Carter Innovations. You'd never dare interfere." Emily said nothing. Her hand brushed the clutch at her side. The cool touch of silver metal steadied her breathing. 1 beat, 2 beats. Then she lifted her head, her eyes burning bright. All they saw was a humiliated woman. But none of them knew at that very moment the CEO they praised in boardrooms stood among them wearing the very dress they had mocked as cheap. A faint smile curved her lips. Calm. Steady. The storm was about to begin. The ocean wind blew fiercely, tossing the white ribbons that surrounded the wedding stage. Roses scattered across the wooden floor, swirling with each gust of wind. Someone laughed, another kept recording, and amid the chaos, Emily Carter stood, tall, calm to the point of fear. Margaret Hale looked at her the way one looks at a loser. Her voice cut through the wedding tent, cold and arrogant. "No home, no assets, no status. Do you really think you can threaten the Hale family? Don't be delusional." Thomas Reed stepped forward, a smirk curling his lips. "You know Emily," he said smoothly. "Carter Innovations, that name you heard at the engagement party, is now Hale Group's biggest partner. Just one contract alone is worth $950 million. Without us, they are nothing. But without us, they would never have signed it." Laughter erupted. Applause followed. The air was thick with cruel amusement, as if they were watching a play for their entertainment. Ryan stepped beside his mother, his tone cold as the sea breeze. "Do you really think walking away from here is a victory, Emily? Without me, you are nothing." Emily looked at him, a long, deep gaze that made him hesitate for a heartbeat. Then she smiled. "If you truly believe that," she said softly, evenly, "then we live in 2 different worlds." A woman in a red dress raised her glass, her voice dripping with mockery. She should know her place. Hear the rich speak and the rest listen. Laughter spread again fast as fire across dry grass. Emily took a deep breath. She could hear her heartbeat, but not from fear, it was because the moment had come. She opened her clutch and lightly touched her phone. The screen lit up. 1 button. For a brief instant, the world shrank to nothing but the sound of wind and her pulse. Then, click. A sharp beep echoed from behind. Everyone turned. The massive LED screen at the back of the wedding altar suddenly flared to life. The Carter Innovations logo appeared on a pristine white background, followed by words that seemed to pierce the air: urgent announcement. Carter Innovations officially terminates the $950 million contract with Hale Group, citing fraud and disrespectful conduct. A wave of shock rippled through the tent. Whispers rose like crashing waves. A man dropped his glass, the sound of shattering crystal slicing through the silence. Margaret's face drained of color. "What is this?" Thomas Reed froze, eyes wide in disbelief. Ryan turned sharply toward Emily, his voice breaking. "What did you do?" Emily stepped forward, took the microphone, and spoke with calm precision, every word hitting like a blade against stone. "I don't need this family! I don't need the title of Ryan Hale's wife. I am Emily Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations, the woman you all just called worthless." The tent erupted. Cameras clicked, voices shouted. Someone gasped in disbelief. "She's Carter, that's her." Margaret staggered back, her trembling hand gripping the chair. "Impossible, you deceived us." "No." Emily replied, her voice cool as still water. "You deceived yourselves, believing that only the wealthy deserve respect." Thomas Reed tried to regain control, his voice trembling but loud. "You can't just cancel the contract, Emily. You need the Hale Group." She turned to him, her gaze dark and steady. "I don't need people who profit by demeaning others." Ryan rushed forward, grabbing her hand desperately. "Emily, don't do this. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I still love you." She pulled her hand free, her movement slow but firm. "Love isn't something you beg for while someone tramples your dignity." Silence fell. Then the sound of phones buzzing filled the air. News had already spread. Headlines appeared across media outlets. Bride CEO cancels, wedding terminates, $950 million deal during ceremony. Margaret collapsed into a chair, her hand covering her mouth. Thomas Reed wiped sweat from his forehead, frantically making calls. Ryan stood frozen, his face pale as marble. Emily turned back to the microphone one last time. Her voice carried no anger now, only quiet strength. "Power doesn't come from money. It comes from the ability to stand tall even when everyone wants you to kneel." She set down the microphone and walked off the stage. Behind her, the crowd descended into chaos, shouting voices, chairs crashing, phones ringing like a storm. But for Emily, there was only silence. She had done exactly what her father once told her. Let your actions speak for you. The storm had passed, and the world would never be the same again. The sound of ocean waves crashed against the distant cliffs, echoing like a relentless drumbeat. Inside the once luxurious wedding tent, only the hiss of wind through torn silk ribbons and the murmur of chaos remained. Dozens of cameras flashed, phones recorded, and news crews swarmed as headlines about the $950 million contract cancellation spread like wildfire. Emily Carter stood calmly in the center of it all. She wasn't pleased nor triumphant, only composed, her expression cold and steady, as if this entire moment had been written long ago. Her gaze swept across the crowd, faces that once mocked her, now pale with shocked lips, that once sneered, now trembling in silence. Margaret Hale still stood in the front row, her hand shaking as it clutched a string of pearls. Her body seemed drained of all strength. "No, this can't be," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Carter Innovations belongs to you." Thomas Reed bent over, sweat dripping from his forehead as his phone rang endlessly. A panicked voice shouted through the receiver, "Mr. Reed, the press is everywhere. Hale Group stock has dropped 15% in 10 minutes. Partners are pulling out." He turned toward Emily, his voice pleading. "Miss Carter, please reconsider. We can renegotiate the contract." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes stopped on Ryan, standing just a few steps away, his face ashen. He no longer looked like the arrogant heir he once was, but a lost man surrounded by the ruins of his own making. "Emily," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "I was wrong. I didn't know. I thought you were just an ordinary girl," she interrupted softly. "And if I were ordinary, would you have loved me any differently?" Ryan fell silent. There was nothing left to say. In her tone, it wasn't a question, it was a verdict. A young woman among the guests spoke up nervously, trying to salvage the moment. Miss Carter, we've always admired you. This was just a misunderstanding. Mrs. Hale didn't mean any harm. Emily turned her gaze toward her. That single look silenced the woman instantly, her voice dying in her throat. A misunderstanding, Emily said slowly, is when someone hurts another by accident. What you did was to make yourselves feel superior. The words dropped like blades. No one answered. One by one, the phones lowered. Margaret sank into her chair, her lips trembling. Emily, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was wrong. Please reinstate the contract. Don't destroy my son. Thomas Reed stepped in, urgently, voice cracking. We can make it right. Whatever conditions you want, just say it. Emily said nothing. She turned toward the horizon where the last rays of sunlight brushed the ocean surface. It wasn't harsh light, but warm. She remembered her father's words. True strength isn't about making others fear you, it's knowing when to let go. She walked to the microphone, her footsteps echoing sharply in the dead silence. There's no need for compensation. Carter Innovations will transfer the contract to Brooks Dynamics, the competitor you all use to look down on. The words hit like thunder. Within seconds, the air filled with the chime of phones going off across the tent, breaking news alerts, stock updates, Hale Group shares plummeting, Brooks Dynamics surging. An investor in the crowd gasped, "My God, we're about to lose everything." Margaret looked up, tears streaking through her makeup. Why are you doing this? Emily met her eyes, her voice soft but cutting. Because sometimes only when people lose everything do they learn respect. Then she stepped away from the microphone, picked up her clutch, and walked toward the exit. Every footstep echoed through the still air. No one dared to stop her. No one spoke. The late sunlight fell across her ivory gown, making it glow like a mirror reflecting every sin that had just unfolded. Behind her, Ryan called out, his voice breaking. Emily, please don't go. She stopped at the doorway but didn't turn around. I already left Ryan, she said quietly. You just didn't notice. Then she walked out. The ocean wind rushed in, sweeping through the tent, tearing down the white ribbons as the Hale empire began to crumble behind her. Ahead of her, a new path stretched open, long, quiet, and filled with light. News spread faster than the ocean wind, sweeping across the sands of Malibu. Just 10 minutes after Emily Carter walked out of the wedding, major media outlets across the country released breaking headlines: bride cancels wedding and $950 million deal during Hale ceremony. CEO of Carter Innovations flips the script with a single click. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram flooded with clips and images. Margaret Hale's pale face frozen in shock, Ryan standing motionless beside the altar, and the silhouette of Emily walking away under the afternoon sun. The hashtag, the wedding. That ended an empire soared to the top of global trends. At the Hale Group headquarters in Los Angeles at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the boardroom doors burst open. Shareholders crowded in panic written on their faces. On the massive screen at the front, the stock chart plummeted, red bars stacking downward like a bleeding wound. Down 38% in 3 hours, an assistant shouted. All partners are pulling out. Another shareholder slammed his hand on the table. Who let Carter Innovations terminate the contract without warning? No one answered. No one dared. Margaret Hale entered her purple jacket, wrinkled her face, ghostly pale. She was no longer the powerful matriarch from the engagement party, just a desperate mother. Call Emily Carter, she rasped. I need to speak to her. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. Thomas Reed, the family's attorney, stood by the door, his expression hollow. His phone buzzed with a message from his firm. Mr. Reed, your consulting contract has been suspended. The ethics committee has opened an investigation. The phone slipped from his hand. 40 years of reputation and career crumbled in a single afternoon. Ryan Hale sat slumped in the corner, his hair disheveled, tie undone. He replayed the video of Emily walking away over and over. She didn't turn back, didn't speak, but that silence hurt more than any accusation. She trusted you. Thomas whispered more to himself than to anyone else, and you made us all lose her. Ryan lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot. No, he said weakly. I lost more than that. I lost myself. Meanwhile, at the Carter Innovations headquarters in San Francisco, the executive floor on the 50th level was alive with quiet excitement. Employees gathered around the large screen where CNBC was broadcasting live. The anchor spoke with measured gravity. The new $950 million contract has officially been transferred to Brooks Dynamics, the longtime rival of Hale Group. Sources confirm that CEO Emily Carter authorized the transfer in just 30 seconds during her own wedding ceremony. Behind them, Daniel Brooks, the young CEO of Brooks Dynamics, watched the screen with a faint, admiring smile. His arms were folded, his eyes glowing not with triumph, but with respect. "She just did what no one in this industry has ever dared to do," he said. "She didn't just cancel a deal, she dismantled an entire hierarchy of arrogance." A female employee asked softly. "Will Miss Carter be all right?" Daniel replied firmly. "She was born to stand in the storm." That evening at the Hale residence in Beverly Hills, the mansion that once gleamed like a palace now sat in darkness. Outside, dozens of reporters camped by the gate's microphones and flashes, lighting up the iron fence. Margaret drew the curtains, her hands trembling. Each phone alert cut like a blade. Hale Group removed from Fortune 500 list. Securities Commission launches internal fraud investigation. International investors terminate contracts. She turned toward her son. Ryan remained motionless, his eyes hollow. "Do something," she screamed. He looked up, his voice hoarse. "There's nothing left to do, Mother." The words hung heavy, draining the room of sound. On social media, one photo spread across the world, Emily's silhouette walking away from the wedding clutch in hand, her dress flowing in the sunset. Beneath it, millions of comments poured in. She didn't run away, she walked out like a queen. They mocked her for wearing a cheap dress, but she held the keys to $950 million. This wasn't just a broken wedding. It was a lesson in dignity. And while the world talked about her, Emily sat quietly in her San Francisco penthouse, the golden glow of sunset reflecting off her calm face. Her phone vibrated endlessly, calls from reporters, interview invitations, new business offers. She silenced them all. Outside, the Hale empire was burning. But she, after the storm, simply sat still, closed her eyes, and whispered the words her father once told her: "When you hold on to your dignity, no one can ever take your strength away." The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in a hazy shade of gold and amber. From the 50th floor of Carter Innovations, the city below looked like a giant mirror reflecting the final light of day. Inside the wide, quiet office sat one woman, Emily Carter, by the glass window. She didn't turn on the lights. The dying sun glimmered through her hair, catching the weariness in her eyes. For days, her name had been all over the news, the woman who ended a billion-dollar wedding, the CEO who redefined power. But she didn't read any of it anymore. Praise or criticism, it was all noise. In front of her sat an old photograph, her father, Robert Carter, smiling kindly in his small workshop, holding that silver pen engraved with the words, "Be still. Be strong." Emily's fingers brushed against the photo, and she exhaled softly. She had won, yes, but every victory leaves behind a hollow space. Not because she'd lost love, but because she had lost the illusion that love was ever fair. A soft knock echoed on the door. A warm, low voice followed. "May I come in?" Emily looked up. Daniel Brooks, CEO of Brooks Dynamics, stood at the doorway. No tailored suit tonight, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, tie-loose fatigue visible on his face, though his eyes remained steady, calm. "Here for business?" Emily asked, her tone even. Daniel shook his head, stepping closer. "No. I'm here for the person." He placed a cup of coffee before her. "Heard you haven't eaten all day." Emily smiled faintly. "I did. A little pride, a lot of gossip." Daniel chuckled quietly, then fell silent. The room filled with the soft sound of wind brushing against the glass. He looked out at the skyline, his voice deep and sincere. "The moment I learned you were the CEO behind Carter Innovations, I understood why Hale Group failed. They were too busy judging others while you were busy building." Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude, though still cautious. "Thank you. But I don't want admiration for destroying someone else's empire. I just did what needed to be done." "No," Daniel said firmly, his gaze unwavering. "You did what millions dream of, but don't have the courage to do. You didn't destroy Emily. You freed. Something stirred in her chest at those words. She turned away, hiding the faint mix of laughter and tears, threatening to escape. It had been so long since anyone spoke to her without pity. Daniel continued, Brooks Dynamics wants a long-term partnership with Carter Innovations. Not for profit, but because I believe in how you lead with integrity. He paused, his tone softening. And if you'd allow it, I'd like to walk beside you not just in business. Emily froze. The moment slowed. She met his eyes, honest, without pretense, without power games, only respect. Aren't you afraid? She asked quietly. I'm the woman who just brought down an empire. Daniel smiled. You can't build something new without letting the old crumble first. His answer made her laugh, the first real laugh in days. She stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the city lights began to flicker awake beneath the fading sun. This city is strange, she murmured. By day, everyone tries to rise above each other, but at night, every light shines at the same height. Daniel joined her, gazing out. That's because darkness teaches equality. And sometimes the brightest light comes from those once dismissed. Emily looked at him, her smile small but warm. You sound like my father. Then he was a wise man, Daniel said gently. And I think he'd be very proud of you. The sky outside deepened to violet the Golden Gate Bridge, glowing like a ribbon of fire across the bay. Emily closed her eyes, breathing in the stillness. Maybe she whispered after all this, what I truly needed wasn't revenge, but peace. Daniel's voice softened. And maybe that peace begins when you stop proving you're enough. Silence lingered, gentle healing. Then Emily smiled, truly smiled, and it lit her face brighter than the skyline itself. She returned to her desk, picked up her father's silver pen, and placed it over a new contract. All right, she said softly but firmly. Let's begin again. This time not with money, but with trust. Daniel nodded and extended his hand. She took it. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the pulse of a glowing city, two people, one who had been humiliated and one who had watched from afar, stood together in the light. Behind them, the digital display came alive with new words: Carter Innovations x Brooks Dynamics, building empires of integrity. Outside the ocean, wind carried the scent of salt and possibility. Emily closed her eyes and lifted her head. No more crowds, no more ridicule. Only her and a world unfolding slowly but filled with light. 3 months after the billion-dollar wedding collapse, the world was still talking about Emily Carter. But the story was no longer about the explosive contract termination. It was about the quiet consequences spreading beneath the surface like the undertow that follows a storm. 1. Margaret Hale, the woman in the empty mirror. The Hale mansion in Beverly Hills was now a ghost of itself. The chandeliers still hung, but their lights were out, and the golden walls now reflected only silence. On the living room table lay dozens of envelopes from banks' lawyers and former partners. Each one was a paper cut to the pride of a woman who once believed power was eternal. Margaret sat before a mirror, staring at her own reflection, a face once stretched tight by surgery and illusion. The new wrinkles around her eyes were not from age, but from regret. I was wrong, she whispered, her trembling hand touching an old photo of Ryan and Emily at their engagement. She had laughed. She had mocked. She had used scorn to teach that girl a lesson. Now that very girl had shown her that class isn't born in your blood. It's shown in how you treat people. Every morning, Margaret walked to the back garden to water the flowers Emily had once planted during a short visit. The gardener said she often sat for hours beside those blooms, silent, unmoving. Perhaps that was her way of atonement, quietly listening to what she had once refused to hear. 2. Thomas Reed, the lawyer who lost his voice. In Los Angeles, Thomas Reed, the man who once took pleasure in humiliating Emily, now sat in a small rented apartment staring at unpaid bills. His law firm had cut ties, his license was suspended for ethical violations. His phone rang endlessly, reporters, former clients, his ex-wife, but he didn't answer. Each night he replayed the wedding video, watching himself smirk and say, "You know, Emily, if you truly loved Ryan, you should have brought something valuable to the table." Hearing it now, the voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, empty and foolish. He turned off the screen, buried his face in his hands, and wondered what he had really traded all those years just to sit at the table with the elite. The answer was clear his conscience. In a short interview weeks later, Thomas said a line that left viewers speechless. "There were cases I won, but today I understand losing to someone like Emily Carter is the only time I've ever felt truly human." 3. Ryan Hale, the man who lost the world in the mirror that showed him himself. The luxury apartment in downtown Los Angeles was now filled only with the sound of an unwatched television. Ryan woke each morning surrounded by bankruptcy reports, shareholder emails, and messages from former friends, all saying the same thing. "I'm sorry I can't be associated with you right now." He had once possessed everything: looks, fame, lineage, power, and he lost it all because of silence. Every night he scrolled through old photos on his phone, Emily's smile, the way she looked at him with trust, with hope. Now he realized the most precious thing in his life wasn't her love. It was the faith she once placed in him. They said Ryan had sold his remaining shares of Hale Group, withdrawn from public life, and left the city. No one knew where he went. Some whispered that he had moved to Montana, started a small farm, and was quietly learning how to be human again. 4. Emily Carter, the woman who never looked back. The world now called her the symbol of dignity. But Emily was still just Emily, the woman who woke up early, made her own coffee, and began her mornings reading messages of gratitude from strangers. A waitress once humiliated for being poor. A black woman denied a job because of her skin. A student mocked during an interview for being unrefined. All of them wrote the same words: "Your story helped me stand tall again." Those messages softened her heart. She didn't need praise. She just needed to know that her story had reached someone somewhere, someone once told they weren't enough. That evening, she and Daniel Brooks stood together on the balcony of their new building, the joint venture between Carter Innovations and Brooks Dynamics. The city below shimmered in light, yet the air was calm, peaceful. Daniel handed her a glass of wine. "The world is learning from you, Emily." She smiled gently. "No, they're just remembering what they already knew, that respect doesn't require a title." They stood in silence, watching the lights of San Francisco ripple on the water below. In the reflection of the glass window behind them, their images stood side by side, not above or below, not owner and guest, just two people looking forward together. Behind them, the world was changing slowly but surely, because some storms don't come to destroy. They come to cleanse the lies and help humanity see its own reflection again. 3 years after the shattered wedding in Malibu, the world had changed, not because a contract collapsed, but because one woman dared to walk away when everyone expected her to kneel. The name Emily Carter was no longer tied only to technology or wealth, but to something far deeper: the culture of respect. 1. The Carter Code, a legacy born from the press of a button. In a grand conference hall in San Francisco, hundreds of entrepreneurs, politicians, students, and journalists rose to their feet in applause. On stage, Emily Carter stepped up in a minimalist white suit, her face still simple as ever yet. Her eyes had changed deep calm and filled with the compassion of someone who had walked through the storm. She took the microphone, her warm, steady voice carrying through the hall. 3 years ago, I thought power was something you held. Now I know true power lies in how you choose to use it. That day when I pressed cancel contract, it wasn't for revenge. It was to remind the world that respect isn't a privilege, it's a responsibility. The room fell silent. A freshman student of economics stood up and asked Miss Carter if you could go back, would you do anything differently? Emily looked down the light from the stage, tracing a soft halo along her cheek. No, she replied gently. But I would forgive sooner. Her answer drew complete silence, because in a world that glorifies victory, few have the courage to speak of forgiveness as an act of strength. 2. Those who once looked down on others are now learning to stand tall again. In Beverly Hills, the Hale mansion had been sold to a charitable foundation. Margaret Hale now lived in a small apartment, teaching etiquette to orphans. She kept a photo of Emily on her desk. Whenever her students asked why she displayed it, she smiled softly. To remember that arrogance is a blade with 2 edges. Thomas Reed, after 2 years of suspension, had returned to law, but this time he only took cases defending the vulnerable. When asked why, he replied, Because a woman once taught me that silence can be noble, but sometimes silence is cowardice. I once stood on the wrong side. And Ryan Hale, the man who once stood by while his bride was humiliated, now ran a non-profit organization called Second Start Foundation, helping failed entrepreneurs rebuild their lives. He no longer avoided cameras. When asked about Emily, he simply said, "She didn't destroy me. She forced me to see who I really was. And that's not a curse, it's a gift." 3. Returning to where it all began. Late afternoon, the golden light of sunset spread across the old garden in Malibu, the same place where the wedding had fallen apart. Now it belonged to Carter Innovations and had been transformed into Haven House, a sanctuary for young women entrepreneurs. Emily stood on the veranda holding a cup of tea. The sea breeze still carried the scent of salt, but there were no mocking laughs anymore, only the sounds of children playing, birds singing, and dreams beginning to take root. Behind her, Daniel Brooks approached, holding a folder. "You know," he said, "we just received the United Nations Award for Corporate Human Dignity." Emily smiled. "It's a beautiful title. But what makes me happier is seeing those girls step into the world without bowing their heads." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "They see themselves in you." Emily shook her head. "No, they see what it took me years to learn, that confidence doesn't need anyone's permission." They stood in silence as the evening light shimmered across the sea. Daniel looked at her, his eyes full of warmth. "You've changed this world, Emily." She smiled gently. "No, I just gave it back its reflection." 4. The final flame. That night, Emily wrote a short letter and posted it on her page. Only a few lines, yet millions read and shared it. "We weren't born to please others. We may not be rich, beautiful, or perfect, but we can choose how we walk. Sometimes it only takes one person standing tall for the whole world to remember how to look at each other with respect." The letter became known as the Carter Manifesto. Universities began including it in their business ethics programs. Companies started talking about the Carter culture, a model of leadership built on dignity, fairness, and gratitude. 5. The final bell. One evening, Emily and Daniel stood on the rooftop of Carter Innovations. Beneath them, San Francisco glowed like a constellation. Daniel said quietly, "The world will speak of you for a long time." Emily smiled and looked at the stars. "It doesn't have to. All I want is for people, when faced with disdain, to remember that once there was someone who stood tall, and that they can too." She turned to him, taking his hand. "We can't stop people from making mistakes, but we can make them think twice before hurting someone." Daniel nodded. "And that's how real justice is born, not from punishment, but from awakening." The night wind swept past, carrying the scent of the ocean and the hum of the city. Below them, the lights kept shining, not for wealth or power, but because each person down there was trying to do something a little better than yesterday. Emily closed her eyes, her smile calm and serene. She was no longer the humiliated bride. She was the symbol of a generation that chose dignity over privilege, forgiveness over vengeance, and courage over surrender. In the distance, the dark ocean breathed softly against the shore. A shooting star streaked across the night sky. Daniel whispered, "Make a wish, Emily." She smiled, her eyes shimmering under the starlight. "No need, Daniel. What I once wished for the world is already living it." And so, under the vast sky, the flame of respect continued to burn, not loud, not blazing, but steady and true, like the heart of the woman who once made the world pause just long enough to remember how to be kind again. From the perspective of an expert in leadership culture and human ethics, Emily Carter's story is not merely a personal triumph, but a wake-up call for an era that has traded respect for fame and power. In a world where numbers speak louder than humanity, she proved that dignity does not need to be justified, it only needs to be upheld. When she stood before hundreds of contemptuous eyes and chose silence, it was not weakness, but the profound strength of someone who knows her worth. And when she pressed the button that canceled a $950 million deal, that act did more than dismantle an empire. It awakened millions who had been quietly enduring in silence. Those who had been belittled, dismissed, and forced to shrink themselves to fit the molds of others. Emily Carter taught us that justice does not always need to roar. Sometimes it only requires the calm nod of a person confident enough not to bow. In a society where status, wealth, and power are worshipped, her story stands as a powerful reminder that the truly strong are not those who defeat others, but those who compel others to reflect upon themselves. In that very moment when Emily walked away from the stage of humiliation, she made the world pause not to look at her, but to look at itself. On a deeper level, it was a victory of ethics over arrogance, of integrity over prejudice, and of awareness over habit. As someone who observes the shifts within corporate and social culture, I realize that every era needs its own Emily Carter, not necessarily a CEO, not necessarily someone in power, but simply someone brave enough not to compromise with disrespect. Because when one person dares to protect their dignity, they not only save themselves, but also pave the way for a future generation to learn how to stand tall. Perhaps what truly makes the world better are not the powerful, but the ordinary people who choose what is right. If you have ever been judged, looked down upon, or forced into silence just to be accepted, remember this: your value does not lie in anyone else's gaze, but in how you face yourself. Believe that kindness is never weakness, and that respect, no matter how simple, always carries the power to change an entire system. If Emily's story touched you, please like this video to help spread the message of compassion and dignity. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking together on the journey of those who dare to stand tall against injustice, who dare to choose decency in a world consumed by pride and competition. Because this is not just a story, it is a mirror reflecting who we are and who we are becoming. And before you leave, I invite you to comment the words, "Keep your dignity."